this value into this field. That level of manual regression testing is the antithesis of exploration because you have to stick to the script. Does that contrast help? Cool.
Okay. So my question is, I'm not sure about the architecture of Cloud Foundry, but I've experienced situations where teams that are downstream from other teams, when they explore, they find some of their issue, but a lot of issues from these other teams, and then they have some issues with their velocity, and there's some kind of feelings of the other teams not keeping up their end of the bargain. So I'm curious if you've experienced that.
Oh, totally, and it didn't even take exploratory testing. CI is awesome for finding those kinds of things. So we have I have to back up and explain that we have this thing called CF release. You saw it referred to in one of the charters. That's a BOSH release. BOSH is our deployment and orchestration tool, and it's got a particular notion of how you should structure a directory, how you should create your directory structure so it knows how to deploy all the things. What we want to deploy when we deploy all the things is the result of multiple teams, not just a single team. Now, this is not exactly in the ideal for how we like to run things, but it kind of is what it is. And we've talked about, should we have multiple BOSH releases so that each team can have their own BOSH release? But no matter what future plans hold, we are where we are. And we have had the case where CF release has a bunch of submodule pointers. We use Git. And so in CI, the CI system goes off and deploys the thing, starts running the system acceptance tests, and things start failing all over the place, and come to find out that it was a check-in where somebody bumped the submodule pointer to something for a component that was controlled by some other team that does not feel direct responsibility for the tests that are running right now. And so this doesn't even take exploration. This just happens as part of CI. And there was a fair amount of foment and consternation because pointing to fingers, you broke the build. And it took us a while to get really good at having a collaborative enough. It didn't help that they were in different time zones. So one team that's contributing is in Boulder, the other team is in San Francisco. And so it's really easy to not see these people who are in Boulder in quite the same way that you see your neighbor who is sitting right next to you. They're other because they're somewhere else and you don't see them every day. And so we had to get really good at getting people on a hangout. Hey, something's up with the build. Let's investigate it together. Do some paired remote pairing to figure out what's going on. Hey, let's retro on this. How could we prevent this from happening in the future? What kinds of test environments do you need to stand up? So that's all totally normal. The only thing that worried me in your question was when you talked about, oh, takes a hit to velocity. Okay. That's why velocity is so awesome, because I'm not trying to hit a goal. It's not a target. Like, I'm going to make 18 velocity this week. So help me, 18. No, that creates all kinds of dysfunction, because then you won't want to pull over the chores that are things that really need to be done, that are about making the images on your machines completely repeatable so you don't have any snowflakes. You aren't going to want to fix the bugs. If the PM prioritizes bugs up high, you're going to be like, no, because then we won't get the points for them. So I'm not worried about velocity. I don't want to worry about velocity. Velocity is an after effect, not a target. It's a thing that I look at and measure so that I get predictability. Everything else is just people learning how to work together and not be jerks to each other.
I was going to say, in this particular place, it was part of their performance reviews, so oops.
Okay, that would be the other dysfunction there. If velocity ever shows up in your performance review, something is horribly, horribly wrong. Did I mention we're hiring? Okay. Both. So the open source stuff, totally open to the public. Oh, so the question was, is your bug reporting system open to the public or is it closed? And my answer is both, because for the open source stuff, you can totally see all of our trackers. If you go to, I think it's wiki.cloudfoundry.org, but anyway, if you go to cloudfoundry.org and then click to get to the wiki, then on the right-hand side of the wiki, you will see links to all of our trackers, and our trackers are where we store bugs, chores, charters, and stories. So you can totally see all of the kinds of bugs that we get, and if you really are curious about whether or not I'm lying about that whole prioritize the bugs thing, you could just follow your favorite bugs through the system and see how long it takes them to get prioritized. By the way, if they bug you, like if it's something that you care about, you can also use the message forum to lobby for your bugs, or GitHub. We tend to be pretty responsive to that. So those are all open. Our closed source stuff, well, it's commercial, sorry.
The reason to ask is because the Wikimedia Foundation, basically all is open except some private things, security, etc. And I was connecting this with the fact that you said that after 6 months, just delete it. Because, I mean, I had the thought sometimes of just running a query, and I'm doing actually that with anything that is older than 2 years. I wouldn't say even 6 months. But that would create some, I don't know, some people would be upset out there. So, yeah, so I wonder if you really close bugs that...
The comment was they're already upset because their bug didn't get fixed in 2 years.
I mean, not to take over the discussion, but like GNU does that, you know, Mozilla does that. I think you could do that. It's not my talk, but.
So for us, we do that. However, when you file a bug against the open source, you don't have the ability to file it directly in the tracker. So the way that we manage that is you file it on GitHub, and then we've got a little service that goes and listens up for GitHub pull requests and bugs and shoves those into the tracker. So the tracker represents what the team's actually going to do, but there's still this record out there. We didn't actually expunge some data that somebody bothered to collect. However, we will close the GitHub issue as essentially we're not going to fix this, which is much more in line with what other open source projects would do.
So that status is actually going to be called won't fix, or does it have some kind of other name?
It depends. I'm sure we've answered these in a variety of ways. Won't fix is one of them. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to report this thing. We really appreciate that you care this deeply. However, at this time, we're not open to considering this. That's another variation on it.
As a boilerplate, or, I mean, so how much time do you invest in thank you, but no?
It varies. So this seems to be on topic, and it's not actually on topic for exploratory testing, but I'm going to tell you what we did anyway, because you guys are in a similar situation. We have so experimented with how to manage the relationship with the community, and relatively early on, at least in my involvement with Cloud Foundry, it was tremendously difficult for our teams to pay attention to what was going on in GitHub, because they're supposed to be working out of the tracker, and so they can't split their time between I'm going to look at the tracker and now I'm going to go pay attention to what's going on in the community. Thus, the whole bot and service thing was born. But even then, they felt that it was tremendously distracting as individual engineers to be having to pay attention to the community. This was a long time ago, but so we experimented, and what we came up with was there's a community pair. And so every week there would be, your stint on community pair was 2 weeks long, and every week somebody new would rotate on. So let's say you start, somebody's been there for a week already, they know the context, and they're the ones, the community pair was then the ones who were responding and taking the time to craft nice messages, and their mission in life was make the community's experience awesome. Whatever you have to do for that, just make that experience awesome. If that means merging pull requests, well, it's not going to be an awesome experience if you merge something that you're not sure works. So you better make sure that you merge it safely, but it might be merging pull requests. It might be responding to the mail list. It might be whatever. So we tried that, and that worked really well for a long time. And because there was a new pair rotating on every single week, you might imagine that 3 weeks later, there's a completely different set of people answering. The quality of the answers is going to be very different, because it's different people and they they just interact with the community differently. And so highly variable, depending on who was on the community pair. Over time, it became excruciatingly difficult to get people onto the community pair because they're like, why do I want to rotate off of my team for 2 weeks? I want to stay on my team and do my thing. And the PMs all kind of stood up and said, you know, kind of feels like we should be managing the relationship with the community. And so now we have a model where teams own their relationship with the community, and the PM is often the one who is responding to, especially if it's a delicate response of, we value your input very highly, dear community collaborator, however, in this case. And then now it's variable, but it's not variable for a given set of repos. It's variable depending on which product manager and their style. And we have some product managers who frankly are a little harsher than I'm comfortable with, denied, or whatever. And then we have product managers who are very gracious and gentle, but it's still variable, just in a different way. Was that, by the way, this is a good time for me to get feedback from you. Was that an interesting story? Should I continue to tell stories like that, or should I stick to the topic? Interesting story, got lots of thumbs up, and nobody walked out. So I'm just going to keep talking. Great. What's next?
So for your open source version, like how do you manage open source and commercial version? You mentioned about GitHub, which is pretty much open to everybody, and then you have another repository for closed source. Also with GitHub, like how do you manage it?
Yeah, so, oh, sure. So the question was, how do we manage the fact that we've got this open source stuff and this commercial stuff? We use GitHub, different repositories or what? And the answer is yes, totally. Not only different repositories, but entirely different organizations.